Okay, good afternoon, good evening, or morning, wherever you happen to be. Welcome to the next in our series of webinars. I'm Julia from WSET School London. I'm merely here to facilitate this evening. We've got an excellent presentation for you tonight. We're looking at the still wines of Portugal, a trip from north to south. Portugal is an area I know a lot of you are interested in and excited for. So yeah, should be a good hour for you. We're going to have a bit of time for questions about halfway through. So if you do have some questions, we'll have a little pause then and at the end. This is all going to be recorded, so you can review it afterwards. But that's about it from me. So pass you over to Junior and let's get going.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome everyone. As I said, it's truly humbling to be speaking to a truly global audience. And that's thank you to WSET for the opportunity and for Julia for putting everything together and the whole team. Also, thank you to Sofia Salvador from Wines of Portugal who helped me with all the new stats. So we're going to have some fresh stats coming up from Wines of Portugal and the IVV. And also thank you to my wife who put the slides together. So I've got the best end of the deal, which is sit down with you, have a nice conversation about Portuguese wine, and enjoy a good glass or maybe two of Portuguese wine. Something that I've been studying since I started my path in wine studies at WSET since early 90s, and I became a Master of Wine in 2008. And from 2009, 2010, I really enjoy more and more wines from Portugal. I've been judging competitions all over the world, the Canto Wine Awards, International Wine Spirits Competition. And I am lucky to be a member of a small panel that decides who are the best wines of Portugal every year. So that gives me a great overview about where Portugal is in terms of quality, in terms of consistency, and so on. And also I write regularly for a publication in Portugal. So I think I don't know everything there is to know about Portugal, but there's so much to know. And I travel there often, or I used to travel there very often. But it doesn't matter how often you go to Portugal, there is always something new, something different. That's a new variety which I've never heard of before. So it's truly interesting, and I hope you enjoy the next hour. What I'm going to do is this is the formula I'm going to use. I'm going to talk about the area, what is planted, describe the terroir a little bit, mention the most important grape varieties, tell you a little bit about styles of the wines that are made in such areas, and maybe share a knowledge or some story or something that you may not even see in books, part of my own experience. So I want to start. I'm going to give you that overview of Portugal at the beginning, and then go area by region, and more or less using the same formula. So it's quite orderly. So if you have a question, feel free to ask, and Julia will have a break halfway through, and we'll have for questions, and we're going to have more questions that I can help you at the end. Okay. So I hope most of you know where we are. It's the southern part of Europe, in the Iberian Peninsula, in the western part. And Portugal is, in terms of size, we're looking at a country which is sort of 220 kilometers from east to west, and 560 kilometers from north to south. To give you an idea, it's 92,000 kilometers squares. What does that mean? It's UK is, to give just to make a comparison, UK is 2.5 times larger than Portugal, and France is 7.5 times larger than Portugal. Portugal is quite a small country. In terms of vineyard area, there are 190,000 hectares planted. Just again to give you a comparison, if we compare with Bordeaux, there are 120 hectares planted in Bordeaux, so it's slightly bigger than Bordeaux. Climatically, Portugal is very diverse. We have Atlantic influence from the west. There's a lot of rainfall and cooling influence from the sea from the west. And the temperature here are more moderate. Towards the border with Spain in the east, the climate is more continental. There's more diurnal changes of temperature, and basically the nights are cooler and during the day it's quite hot. It rains less, and I think it's fair to say that Portugal is cooler in the north. Roughly, the average temperature there is 16 degrees on annual average, and in the south it's slightly warmer, 17 degrees. So just to give an overview of the climate of Portugal. And in the south it's dry and hot and more Mediterranean and mild winters, and that's basically the overall climate. And I'll talk more precisely about the climate as we go down to different regions. Soils. People often talk about soils and say, okay, this Douro is schist and Bairrada is clay and so on and so forth. In reality, there is a wealth of soil in Portugal. There is this map, I think, illustrates how diverse it is. And also this map shows you how the soils, even in one region, how they coexist. So you'll be surprised, I'm sure you learned something even about the Douro, because everyone thinks Douro is schist. And when you get to the Douro, I'll tell you a little bit more, and there is more than schist in Douro. But just to give you an idea, there's a wealth of soils and they coexist in many, many regions. To add to this diversity of Portugal, we have this wealth of grape varieties. I'm not going to talk too much about history, but Portugal was under dictatorship between 1932 and 1974, so it was isolated. But the good thing about it is that this diversity was preserved, and this diversity which has been selected over many, many centuries. And the grapes that are well adapted to some really arid, some really hot conditions that Portugal has. And also, I'll speak a little bit about genetic diversity in terms of clonal variations, and I think it'll be interesting, but I'll talk a little bit more about the varieties as we go along. This is the most updated statistics that I was able to get from the IVV, which is the Institute of Vine and Wine. They haven't released the newest stats, which was supposed to be done a few months ago. This is from last year, but this is the most updated. And I assume not much has changed. You may find some of the varieties going slightly up or slightly down, but the order that you're seeing here, it will not change very much. So the main variety here is Tempranillo in Spain. For those friends of us who are in Barcelona, it's the same as Tinta Roriz or Aragonés in Alentejo, same variety, same name. Second variety is Touriga Franca, then Touriga Nacional. And in fourth, you have Fernão Pires, which is the first white variety. I put you can see in the slide, the green are the white varieties and the reds are red varieties. So on and so forth. And you got Castelão, which also is known by the name of João de Santarém in Periquita. In sixth position, you have Trincadeira, then Baga, which is closely associated with the region of Bairrada, and Loureiro, which is a white variety mostly from the north of Portugal, Arinto, and then you have the first truly international variety, which is Syrah. The good news, I guess some good news for you guys today, you're gonna like this, some of you who don't know, but Portugal, I know it's difficult to pronounce many of the varieties, if you're not an English speaker. Also, it's more confusing because you get some varieties, which is, you can see on the screen, Castelão and Periquita, which is the same name, is a synonym. And even if you look at most books in the subject, there are many different names, local names that they use. The good news is this. I think since early 2000, the IVV simplified a lot. And most of the varieties, they only have one name now. So it's easier for us to study. But there are a few, for example, the Tinta Ruiz Aragonés, which there are two official names. But in most cases, you will find one. And that's, I think, is a relief for most of us who study wine. So completing the whole thing, you have 250 varieties. You have a diversity of soils. You have the human factor. You have very experienced winemakers, Luis Pato and Dirk Neerpoort, some of the older guys. I shouldn't say older, so more mature, more experienced. But also you have younger guys. You have the daughter of Luis Pato, Filipa Pato. You have the son of Domingos, who's Tiago Alves de Souza. What I'm saying is that there is experience there, but there's also some fresh blood. So the whole thing, great varieties, diversity of soil, diversity of climate, human factor. And I'm not even talking about clonal variation, which I'll tell you in a second, but also altitude, different exposures. So you put this all together and gives what I really love about Portugal, which is this diversity. And to start talking about this diversity, we start right in the north of Portugal, talking about the region of Vinho Verde. It's when I was studying, I remember Vinho Verde for me was a small area in the corner of northwest of Portugal, and that's it. And there are some lovely fresh wines, some very commercial wines, and things that they have changed a lot. First of all, it's not a small region, and it will surprise many people to know that the border, it actually goes from the Spanish border in the north all the way going past the Douro, almost not touching the city of Porto. So it's a very large area. It actually goes south of Porto and south of the river. So it's really from north to south is 130 kilometers, and from west, from the Atlantic Ocean, from the Atlantic Ocean to the east is about 90 kilometers. So it's a quite large area. In this area, now we talk about white wines, but until the 70s, it was red wines dominated. It is a large area. You can see there is 21,000, almost 22,000 hectares. The main varieties here is Alvarinho, Trajadura, Arinto, which is also known as Pedernã locally, Loureiro, and another variety which is the only red there, which is called Vinho. But there are more. There's, for example, there's a variety called Azal, there's a variety which is a white. There's another variety called Avesso, which is also white. And there are other things that they used to make rosé, which is called Espadeiro and Padeiro. And there's one variety which to make red wine, which I think we will be hearing more of, which is called Alvarelhão, which reminds, if you vinify it gently, you almost reminds me a little bit of Pinot Noir, which is great wine. And something I think people will be surprised to know that when you're talking about exporting wines, we think of Douro, but the first region actually to export to England in the 14th century was Vinho Verde, which I think may surprise some of you. The reason for that is that a town called Viana do Castelo, it was a British commercial base, so that we started importing wines. And out of all the varieties, while I still have a little bit of time, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the varieties which I enjoy the most, and one of them is Alvarinho. Someone once, when I started to study, they described Alvarinho as not technically. I'm talking about the profile of the profile has the aromas of Viognier sometimes, and the freshness and the acidity of Riesling. I'm not so sure, but I would certainly recommend Alvarinho for people who like Viognier, people who like Riesling, people who like Chenin Blanc, people who like Bruna Veltliner, and people who like Albarino from Spain. Even Cortese from Italy. I think those wines, if you like those wines, you should try Albarino. It's lovely, depending on the style, but the lovely citrus fruits and orange peel, peach and passion fruit, sometimes fresh apple. And the wines, they age great. They age gracefully. I've tasted some Albarino. They are over 10 years old. They are wonderful, beautiful wines. Great wines to have with fish and with seafood, with pasta, with rice dishes, with salads. So if you like some of those wines I mentioned, try Albarino. I think you enjoy it. Vinho Verde is a large area, as I described earlier. I told you the boundaries, so I'm not going to repeat myself. It's quite a humid area in terms of rainfall. It rains about, on average, 1,200 millimeters annually. Just to compare with Bordeaux, it's about 920, so it's more humid than Bordeaux. The soil here is mostly granite. There's a bit of sand. Also, there are two bands of slate from northwest to the southeast of the region that cut across. That, as I said to you at the beginning, the soils coexist, and here this is an example. There are very small holdings in this area. If you can look at some of the statistics from this CVR of Vinho, which is very, very small. I think there's 129,000 parcels. So it's very small holdings. And there are, if you go to the area, all the vineyards, you see polyculture, people having animals and vegetables and corn all grown together. That was in the past. Today things are changing. The wines are being planted on wires and in plots in different varieties. And one thing, I'm going to talk about styles of wine. I said to you when I was studying, you had those, stylistically, people describe Vinho Verde as wines with a bit of residual sugar, a little bit of CO2. They still exist. But since the 80s, the styles became drier. And we see more and more varietal wines. You have the normal blend, Alvarinho, Trajadura, and Pedernal, which is Arinto. They do blends. They still do. But many producers now are using single varieties from Avesso, from Loureiro, and so on and so forth. And in the future, those are the sub-regions of Vinho Verde. I don't want to complicate too much. But I just want to tell you, for example, here in the north, Monção and Melgaço, it's higher altitude, it's more sheltered from the sea, it's a little bit warmer. In this area, it's Alvarinho. It's the variety that makes the best wines. If you go down here in the blue area in Lima, you have Loureiro and so on. If you go right down in the south here in Baião, here is Avesso. Avesso is a variety which has got lovely freshness. The wines have been neutral, but they can age well as well. So basically, it's not everything. Everything is planted in many places, but in the future we'll see more. We'll see more of a variety to be matched with certain terroir. We're already seeing that. So you're going to see when we talk about Alvarinho, it's going to be Monção and Melgaço. When we talk about Loureiro, it's going to be from the valley of Lima, and so on and so forth. I mentioned in the 70s earlier, the vast majority of the wines were reds. Today is the opposite. 87% of what is planted is white. Only 7% red, and rosé is about the balance, 6 or 7%. So this is Vinho Verde. And we move on to Douro, and we have two wines from the Douro. We'll taste them in a bit, but Douro is The whole area is about 250,000 hectares, the whole delimited area. What is planted is only 17% of what is boundaries are planted, which is there on the screen, 42,556 hectares. There's a lot of different grape varieties here. In total, there are 115 or 116 approved varieties. And I put on your screen here some of the most important ones. Tinta Roriz, which is Tempranillo, Touriga Franca, Touriga Nacional, Tinta Barroca, Tinta Pinheira, Sousão, which is the same variety as Vinho in Vinho, where we just were. And then a couple of whites, Rabigato, Malvasia Fina. We also have varieties such as Gouveia and Vinho, which is all the two other white varieties. And I'll tell you just a little bit quickly about Tinta Roriz. Tinta Roriz is a Tempranillo in Spain. So if you like Spanish Rioja or Ribera del Duero, if you like Sangiovese, things like that, you should try a Tinta Roriz from Portugal. And I have been confused about Tinta Roriz. When you read, depending on what books you read, people tell you, oh, the grapes, they have high acid, they have low acid, some have high in tannins, some are low in, so it's quite confusing. So I think, why is this? And I was lucky to do a masterclass with a friend of mine, Sarah Jane Evans, Master of Wine, and in Texas last year, and it was purely about Tempranillo. So I studied quite in detail Tempranillo. And the reason for that is there is not one Tempranillo. There's over 250 clones of Tempranillo. So you really have to think, you know, why textbooks vary so much in terms of the structure of Tempranillo. Some say it's too firm, some say it's high in acid, and so on. No, it's, for example, if you wanna plant a clone of Tempranillo which is high in acid, go and plant clone 54, and so on. So there's specific clones for certain characteristics. If you want a thicker skin, a thinner skin, and so on and so forth. But Tinta Roriz from the Douro, it's lovely and juicy, notes of cherries, notes of raspberries. In a warmer climate, in Alentejo, even darker fruits. Is a variety that responds very well to oak, ages well, as we know, notes of tobacco and vanilla and clove and cedar and sweet spices. Sometimes black tea, tobacco, as I said earlier, earthy notes. It's a great wine to have with lamb, with beef, with pork, and so on. So it's a recommend Tinta Roriz from Douro. Douro is the oldest demarcated and regulated area, wine producing area in the world. And people who are doing their diploma and have studied, they'll probably raise their hand and say, hey, hang on a second, Tokai has been demarcated in 1737, and you're right. But here's the trick, they were demarcated, but they were not regulated. So Marquês de Pombal demarcated and regulated Douro in 1756. It is an area I put here, extreme viticulture. It's those of you who have not visited Douro, you should visit this picture here. Credit to João Portugal Ramos, which is a great producer in Portugal. That's one of his pictures, what he shared with us. You see that 53% of the vineyards in the Douro have an incline of 30% or more. It's really, really steep. It's hard, it's very hot. It's a lot of small properties there. There are 25, to give you an idea, there's 25,000 growers, and out of the 25,000 growers, 17,000 own less than 1 hectare. So it's really small properties, so they sell grapes and so on and so forth. And it's hot. If you go there in the summer, it's late 40s, late 30s, 40, 42 degrees. And to work going up those steep hill with weight on your back, carrying grapes, it's you have to admire those people. It's amazing. If you look at most textbooks, you see Douro is about schist. And I told you earlier, I'll tell you something a little bit different that you may not see in books. In fact, there are more than 60 different geological formations in Douro. And I've seen in some vineyards in the Douro Superior soil that resemble Chablis, a complete white limestone soil. So it's quite shocking. But you do find quite a bit of granite, especially towards where Douro borders with another region called Beira Interior. But there is not only schist. And even if we talk about schist, I was talking to the winemaker from Barca Velha, and he said, oh, we're talking about schist, but actually on their studies, there are 16 different types of schist. So it's as I said, Portugal, it doesn't matter how much you know, the more you study, the more you need to study and learn more about. Every time, this thing about the schist, I only learned a few months ago. I didn't realize there are 16 types of schist. In terms of styles of still wine there, red wines, in the past, I thought them a little bit powerful, a little bit too structured. But things are changing now. I think you see even some of the red wines coming down to 12.5, even lower than that. So the styles are becoming a little bit more elegant. And this is what I like. So we have a quick chat. And one of the wines I suggest people could buy is the Planalto, which is here. If you guys don't know this wine, my first experience with this wine, I tasted in Douro a couple of years ago. I was on holiday and I got there on a Sunday and everything was shut, and I bought in a small corner place, and basically this wine is available everywhere. And I bought from Majestic here in London, and the price was amazing. I said, this wine is such a phenomenal value for money. The guy said, I know, it's one of the biggest selling wines. It's 12.5% alcohol. It's fresh, it's vibrant, and it's amazing. It's a blend of all white varieties that are grown in Portugal. It's Vinho, Malvasia Fina, Gouveia, Rabigato, Códiga, Arinto, and a little bit of Muscatel. It's got lovely freshness, lovely acidity. There's no oak at all. Just easy to drink, and surprising to be such a warm region to have a wine that's so elegant and fresh and low in alcohol. I'll tell you briefly. This is you probably seen this. This is a map that the Institute of Vinho do Porto shared with me, so I could share it with you. It tells about the 3 different regions: Cima Corgo, Baixo Corgo, and Douro Superior. You have on the left-hand side, you have Douro, which is about 80 kilometers west of here. So here we have the first region that's slightly darker is the Baixo Corgo, slightly cooler area. There are 14,000 hectares planted there, roughly. And then in the center, you have the Cima Corgo, which is the heart of port-producing areas. I'm not going to talk too much about port. We're talking about the still wines, but it's some of the best vineyards in Portugal are from this area. And when I was studying for my diploma, and they mentioned quickly about Douro Superior, saying it's a very hot region and so on. And today you go there, and some of the best wines from Portugal, some of the most iconic wines come from Douro Superior. It's a beautiful region. It's very wild. It's quite hard to get to, but it's worth a visit. It's not very widely planted. It's less than 10,000 hectares planted, but it's a wonderful region to visit. And we stop and talk about another red wine that I suggest you guys taste it, which is Alterno. Again, I selected this wine because it tells about Douro. It has the soul of Douro, and it's such a phenomenal value for money. And the grape varieties here are a blend of Touriga Franca, 35%, Touriga Nacional. There's a little bit of Alicante Boucher, Tinta Barroca, and Tinta Roriz. Tinta Franca, if you guys like Shiraz, if you like Malbec, if you like Merlot, Tinta Franca is a great variety. It doesn't have the exuberance of Touriga Nacional. It's got beautiful silky texture, very sophisticated. Got dark fruits, some floral notes. This wine that I'm tasting here, it's very pure. It's exuberant. It's lovely notes of cherries and plums, some spices. It hasn't seen very much oak, only 6 months, and quite a bit of it is 400 liters, so it's larger oak. And the oak here hasn't marked the wine a lot, so it's for me it's quite it's got beautiful purity of flavor. If you guys, I can talk a little bit about the winemaking later, but I'm conscious that we're halfway through, and I don't want to be rushing later on. So I'll just move on to Trás-os-Montes, which is in Portuguese, basically means cross beyond the mountains. So you have to cross the mountains to get to these regions. The Romans has been there, and they left evidence of winemaking. They carved some lagares in granite. It is not a small area. There's small ridges. There's 13,539 hectares of vineyards planted. The varieties here, you notice, are very similar to what you see in the Douro. Basically, it's like almost an extension of the Douro. Douro is just south of here. And you have you have here some Chardonnay, you have a little bit of Sauvignon, the first Pinot, Syrah, but the vast majority are Portuguese grapes. The terroir here, we're talking about beautiful, as you can see in the picture, lovely undulated hills and some forests, some olive groves, fruit trees. The altitude here goes up to 700. There is a lot of variation in temperature between day and night. It is hot, it is dry. There is very little disease pressure. Winters are very cold here. There are not many producers here, probably about 100 producers. Not many, there's not much wines that reaches export market, less than 20%. But the region is mostly, what's made here is mostly red wines. And as I said, a little, almost you can draw some parallels with Douro in terms of style, maybe a little bit fresher, a little bit slightly more higher acidity, and a little bit more rustic. I would say the tongue is a little bit more angular, but it's. I think we're going to hear more about Trás-os-Montes as we go in the next decade or so. Then we go to Bairrada, or Beira Atlântico. Beira Atlântico is the whole area, the big region, and Bairrada is I think what the GOP is. And the Bairrada, where when you talk about Bairrada, you talk about Baga, and the GOP here is only Baga is only about 6,000 hectares. So the whole Vinho Regional, or IGP, if you guys studying for your diploma, is the Beira Atlântico, and the GOP is Bairrada. Vast majority here is Baga. There is a little bit of Touriga Nacional, Afrocheiro, and the whites is mostly Fernão Pires, which is also called Maria Gomes, and Picao. Baga, I'll tell you quick. I just want to talk a little bit about Baga, and if you guys like Nebbiolo, if you like stuff with structure, if you like Carignan, if you like Plavac Male from Croatia, if you like Sinomavo from Greece, those wines with a bit of grip, try Baga. It's a late ripening variety. It's firmly structured. It's got high acid, and lovely notes of red fruit, plums, some cherries, very assertive acidity, and goes beautifully with the suckling pig from Bairrada. If you've been to Bairrada, you must have eaten a suckling pig, and Baga goes very well with it. Anything oily, some oily stews. Also from Baga, they make some sparkling wines, and quite interesting. This region only received its DO in 1979. Historically, it was an area where negociants used to be located. So they buy wine from all over Portugal and blend, and then they sell out to export markets. So I think there was no on the interest to be regulated. So it came quite late, only in 1979. In terms of geography here, it's fairly lowish altitude. We're not too far from the sea here, so you have a lot of sea influence. If you talk to Luis Pato, he'd love to tell you that the area here is cooler than Bordeaux. The soils, Bairrada, comes from the word bairro, which is clay, but also you find some limestone soils, and the wine styles here, as I mentioned, the baga earlier, the wines are more grapey and made to go with food. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the suckling pig, and Bairrada and baga, they're made to go together. And they are wonderful. Then we move on to the east of this region of Bairrada. We are in Terras do Dão. Terras do Dão, where Dão is. Terras do Dão is protected by mountains. You have in the west 2 mountains. One is called Caramulo and Busaco. In the east you have Nave, and in the south you have Estrela. So it's quite protected, well protected. The varieties here are Jaén, a little bit of Baga, Touriga Nacional, also Tinta Roriz, Malvasia Fina, which is a white, Fernão Pires, and Cruzado. But I want to tell you quickly, tell you 2 things. I'll talk about those 2 varieties. One is Touriga Nacional, and the other one is Baga. Touriga Nacional, the highest diversity, genetic diversity is in Dão. So people think that it originated in the Dão. And it's interesting to see that in the 19th century, Touriga Nacional made 100% of the wines from the Dão. And going back 1 century later, in the 20th century, basically it was only making 5%. So it was disappearing from this area. And at the same time, Touriga Nacional, it was also losing area in the Douro. In 1970s, it only accounted for 0.1% of the area. So it was going up. It was disappearing, and the reason for that, it was very, very low yielding. You get less than a kilo per plant, and it was not financially viable. People start growing up and so on. So people got together, studied, and came up with some different clones of Touriga. And since then, thankfully, this has been reversed. You saw Touriga, I think, if you go back to the slides before, I think it's the 3rd most planted variety. So, and it's a wonderful variety. If you like Shiraz, if you like Malbec, if you like Petit Syrah, if you like those fleshy, put-forward Rhone wines, or even a Cabernet blend, it's Touriga. It's a wonderful variety. It's the best known variety in Portugal. It's got great pedigree. It makes not only red wine, it makes rosé, makes wonderful sparkling wines, and beautiful notes of blackberries, cassis, violets, bergamot, and so on. It's got very firm structure, got a very assertive freshness. It's a great wine to go with food. And I think you don't find that many 100% Touriga Nacional. You'd find, obviously, but they are mostly seen in blends. And the other variety which Portugal does extremely well is a variety many of you may not even heard of. It's called Encruzado. I hope you have heard, but it has only been mentioned in textbooks since the Second World War. So it's a very new variety. It was planted for a long time, but it was part of mixed plantings. So if you compare that with something like Rocazzetelli from Europe, which was mentioned in 5 AD. So this variety is a baby. It was only started being micro-vinified in the 50s, and people start really paying attention in planting in little plots since the 90s. So it's a baby. If you like white Burgundy, if you like Chenin Blanc, if you like Vermentino, if you like, some New World, more fruit-forward wines, try Encruzado. They tend to be a little bit neutral at the beginning of their lives, but they evolve wonderfully. So Encruzado needs a little bit of time in a bottle, or they need to be aged in oak for a while, but not to be overdone. And they do, in my opinion, sometimes they can be mistaken, but they can be compared or associated with a good Burgundy. The variety got very thick skin, got good acidity. The balance between sugar and acid is great. So the wines are always harmonious, and notes of stone fruits, melon, passion fruits, sometimes floral notes. Great wine to go with seafood, some oily fish. If you like bacalhau from Portugal, and Cruzado is a pretty interesting variety for you to try. And we are here. We're still talking about the Douro, so the down. So it's just south of the Douro, 80 kilometers from the sea. Is also protected from the mountains. We're talking about if you drive south, if you drive south and you get of Porto, and then you turn inland, you look at your car. If your car you can tell the altitude, it goes up from almost nothing. You can see the going up in altitude, and obviously then you get a little bit more freshness. You have soils here more granite. You get schist also. The vast majority, 97% of the soil is granite. You have a little bit of schist and a little bit of sand. It's warm, it's protected, it's less humid than Bairrada because it's got all the mountains. I think the mountains I mentioned earlier, they are protected it down, not Bairrada. Bairrada is more open to the sea. You got more sea influence in Bairrada. Here you want more protection, more warmth and less humidity. You have higher variation of temperature between day and night. This variety here, I put the recent past because this region, there was a lot of cooperatives in the past here, and maybe the reputation didn't do very well for the reputation of the area. But since the 90s, there have been new life, private money, new producers, and the wines here are fabulous. There are only 4, to the best of my knowledge, there are only 4 cooperatives left. There are about 120, 130 wine producers. And if you speak to producers in Portugal, you note when you ask them, so what do you like, even from the Douro, which wines do you enjoy? Say, oh, I like one. When you're not drinking wines from the Douro, your own wines, which wines do you really enjoy? And most people like wines from down. And I have to say, I have a soft spot for down. I love wines from Douro. I love wines from Vinho. I love the exuberance of Alentejo. Wines from down for me, they have structure, they have exuberance of fruit. Always they have a lovely vibrancy and lovely freshness, which I think is phenomenal. Try if you can get some stuff from there. Encruzado and Touriga Nacional are what I would recommend to you. Going east, we are in Terras da Beira. It's an area which is not so well known. I think we're going to hear more and more about this area. There's only 15,000 hectares planted. The varieties here are mainly are called Rufete, which is same as Tinta Pinheira in Douro. You also have reds. You have Rufete, Tinta Pinheira, Tinta Roriz, Touriga Nacional, Tinta Franca. Also, in the whites, you have Syria and a variety called Fontecal. This area, the climate here is continental, very hot summers, very cold winters, and soil is granite. You find sometimes you're driving and find those huge boulders around the area. The altitude here varies from roughly 300, it goes all the way up to 700. very cool nights and slow ripening, and you have some. Consequently, the wines they have that crunch, that vibrancy, and the freshness. Really, really assertive acidity from wines from Terras da Beira or the DOC's Beira interior. Okay, so I'm gonna have a glass of water. See if there's any questions, Julia.
Okay, yeah. Lots of information so far. I've been trying to keep an eye on the chat. There's just a lot of appreciation going on for various Portuguese wines.
We can carry on away to the end then.
Oh, well, just one of the earlier questions I noticed was just about your very early slide on the most widely planted grape varieties, and a couple of people expressing surprise that Albarino wasn't included in that. Is that just because it's more localized?
In terms of the most planted? Okay. No, Albarino it is very localized. Is in Minho. It is planted specifically in the sub-region of Monção and Melgaço. But you see migration of Albarino. It's being planted more and more in the Atlantic part of the Alentejo, where it is slightly cooler. We'll talk about that in a minute. Also, is planted in Lisbon, and also planted a little bit in Peninsula de Setubal. But it's not very widely, as you say, doesn't even make the top 10.
Yeah, I guess it's one we're just a bit more familiar with. So I think, yeah, a couple of people were surprised by that.
Okay, shall we carry on?
Let's do it.
So we are now we're in Lisbon. It's an area which is growing. Plantains are growing. I think if you look at the stats, it's probably one of the areas that plantains are growing faster than any other region in Portugal. There are 17,989 hectares. Many varieties planted. I put here Castelão, Aragonês, Touriga Nacional, Fernão Pires, Arinto. But there are many more. Sauvignon. A lot of international varieties are making their way into this area. There are a lot of DOCs here. Some better known than others. They tend to be quite small. I think the largest one here is the first one, which is Alentejo, which is about 600 hectares. But then you get to Bucelas, is 140 hectares. But some of the stuff, Colares is only 17 hectares, so they're quite small. Carcavelos is only 10 hectares. And I think the tendency here is to people bottle wines under the Vinho Regional Lisboa, as opposed to DOC. And the reason for that is this region was known up to 2007 by the name of Extremadura, and since then became Lisbon. I think people wanted to capitalize on the proximity to the capital, and also it's easier to pronounce, easier name. It's been very successful. It's an area that financially I think producers are doing well. But viticulture has been there since Roman times, and cultivation has been there in the past, also done by religious orders, as was the case in Burgundy and Champagne and so on and so forth. The climate here is Atlantic. There's a lot of breeze coming from the west and fog, and consequently the wines are, they say, someone said, people from certain areas of this region say, they don't go to the beach until midday, because basically it's too cold and it's foggy, and wait for the fog to lift off and the temperature to warm up. So people don't go to the sea. What I'm saying is it keeps the vineyards cool, and consequently people say sometimes the wines are here in Portugal called Vinho Leve, light wine, very fresh wine. The areas here is a very long and narrow strip, west and north of the capital. There's a lot of different soils here. You see clay, you see limestone, you see basalt. low altitude vineyards, some gently undulated. I mentioned the varieties, but also there are some really quirky and unusual, interesting varieties. Something called Vital, which you're going to hear more about it. People are getting excited about this. Jampal, which is a variety which I get very excited. If I have a tasting, I can show Jampal I use because I have a few bottles in my cellar and ones are wonderful. Another variety is called Ratinho, which is something unusual. Basically, you go to Portugal, you're going to learn something new or new varieties. I haven't even tasted some of those varieties. We are moving to Tejo. We're in the heart of the country. You can see here on this map. Again, viticulture has been here since Roman times. 11,000, almost 12,000 hectares planted. Again, many varieties. I put a few of the most important: Castelão, Trincadeira, Aragonês, and Fernão Pires, which is a mostly planted white variety. But there are Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay. There's also Touriga Nacional. There are some wonderful Alicante Boucher. And there's some lovely, really old vines, some 100-year-old vines in this area. It is an area which is quite hot. There is 2,800 hours of sun on average every year, not dissimilar to Alentejo. It's very sunny. Rains in average 750 millimeters, but rain is not a problem. They have a big river to help irrigation if necessary, but also not so much the irrigation is the river brings freshness, some cooling influence from the river, and also the cooling influence that comes from the sea helps to refresh this area. I'm not going to get too technical here but there are 3 subregions. One is called Campo, one is called Chaneca, one is called Bairro. I'll leave it like that for now. But stylistically, the wines are exuberant, fruit-forward, and they tend to retain a sense of freshness from what I said earlier, from the influence from the sea. But they tend to be more, I think it's fair to say more New World in style. It's a region that I think will grow in terms of status, because at the moment only 20% of the wine that's made there are DOC. It's a lot of bulk wine, a lot of regional wines. There's some cooperatives which make a lot of wines and sell in bulk. So I think in the future this region is towards higher quality and DOC wines. Peninsula de Setubal, I think most of you friends are probably as guilty as I am. You go to fly into Lisbon, if you're lucky, then you go either east or you go north. I very rarely go south, which is, you should, because all you need to do is, if you're in Lisbon, is to cross a bridge. Is the bridge 25th of April bridge. And then you are in this wonderful area of Peninsula de Setubal. There are 7,265 hectares. I put here the main varieties. The main by far for red wine is Castelão. And I'll tell you Castelão in a minute, because it is a wonderful variety. People think, oh, it's a bit rustic, but it's not so. I've written an article recently. Actually, I'll tell you about it now since I'm telling you. And I also thought, okay, Castelão is a variety which is a little bit rustic and so on. So I went with an open-minded. And in this area, there's a lot of sandy soils. And old vine Castelão from these sandy soils, they are phenomenal. They make some of the most wonderful wines from Portugal. People never know about it. If you like Tempranillo, if you like Sangiovese, if you like a Nero d'Avola, Montepulciano, even a Grenache, if you like those styles of wine, try a Castelão, especially from this area and from old wines. And Castelão, it can be quite rustic, and uninteresting if it's high yielding. Yes, I agree. And they can make some lighter wines and easy to drink wines, but they can make some beautifully firmly structured wines to go with food, with lovely mushroom risotto, grilled chicken, pasta dish, some game. It's a wonderful variety, but you have to treat well. And that's my tip for you today. Discover Castellão from old vines. And in this area, I mentioned, so the flat part is mostly planted with Castellão, and then you have some hills going up to 500 meters, some more calcareous soil, and here we have more Muscat and some international varieties planted. You have Setubal, two DOCs, Setubal for fortified wines and Palmela for still wines. The geography of this region is, as I said, flat and hilly, sandy soils and calcareous. You have Mediterranean climate. You have very hot, dry summers. You have mild, rainy winter, and I think that's it. And I don't want to talk about fortified wines by 10 seconds. For those of you who have not tasted Muscatel de Setúbal, this is probably, people talk about Madeira being underrated. Yes, I agree. But I think some of the Muscatel de Setúbal, 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, are some of the most underrated, some of the most amazing fortified wines, and people very often overlook. So, and the reason for me to tell you that is because they are such a good value for money. So try it. And we are in Alentejo. Alentejo, it's a large, huge area. It covers, you can see here, almost a third of the country. But only 25,544 hectares planted. Many varieties, the most important, Aragonês, Brincadeira, Alicante Boucher as the reds, and then you have Antalvaj, Arinto, but you have many other varieties. You have Syrah, Touriga Nacional. There are over 60 varieties that planted there. What else I want to tell you about Alentejo? I think this is it. It's basically from the border from the Tejo all the way to when it hits Spain. It is hot. If you go to Alentejo in the summer, it's often 30s, mid 30s to 40s. A lot of sunshine, 3,000 hours of sunshine. It rains not very much, 600 millimeters on average. Very little disease pressure. Climate is continental, so if in Lisbon it's 10 degrees in the winter, in Alentejo it's -5, for example. It's really continental. Soil is difficult to pinpoint. It varies a lot. I mean, I remember being visiting one small vineyard, and you see, like in Alsace, one spot you see many different types of soil, and Alentejo is the same to an extent. I think it's fair to say general, and Alentejo is like the new world in terms of style. It received its DO in 1988, but when you dig deep, you see many different things. You see the more modern styles. You look for producers such as Cortes de Cima, exuberant, modern, and you go into different producers such as Mochal, really traditional. You see people making wine from amphora. So as in general, people talk about New World, but when you dig deep into this area, you have many different styles. It's a really interesting area. I always thought, okay, this is a very big and sunny area, but when you go, you dig deep, you see you have 180 kilometers from north to south. You have many different terroirs. Here in the north, for example, in Porto Alegre, you have very high altitude. You have granite soils. You have old vines. So when we talk about Maule in Chile and Swartland in South Africa, being people going back and paying attention to those old vines, really cool areas. Porto Alegre is the equivalent in Alentejo, I would say. Then you go here into Regengos, and it's hotter. It's also got granite soils. When you go into the Vidigueira, you got more limestone. You got some clay. I see someone who was enjoying a glass of Antanvage. Antanvage is very famous from this area. It's beautiful. It makes wonderful wines here. So what I'm saying, Alentejo from the distance is quite easy to understand. Oh, it's New World, it's exuberant. But when you go down closer, it's got many different terroirs. It's really interesting region. Then we go down south. We are in Algarve, almost at the end of Portugal. In Algarve here we are a small area, 1,352 hectares. The varieties here are Negra Mole, Syria, which is a white, and Arinto, which is also white. And you have also the reds, aside from Negra Mole, which is the same as you find in Madeira, to make some of the Madeira wines. You have Castelão and Aragonese. There are 4 DOCs in Algarve. We don't see very much of those wines in exports. I mean, they have a huge local market. There are 9 million people visiting Algarve every year, so most of the wines stay locally. The climate here is Mediterranean. I think you can fair to say it's almost an extension of Alentejo. 300 very sunny, 300 hours of sun every year, very little rain. I have the sea influence to keep it cool. Soils very near the coast is more sandy, and you go inland it's calcareous, and as you go towards the hills is more schist. And the wines again varies in terms of style, but they tend to be really fruit forward, almost like in Alentejo, more fruit forward, a little bit more perhaps more alcoholic. But they can surprise you. One day someone sent me a bottle of wine to taste last year actually. I said, white wine from Alentejo must be flat. And it was a blend of Arinto and Chardonnay. And it was wonderful, 12.5% alcohol, fresh and crisp and wonderful, really surprising. So they can surprise you. So that's Portugal, continental. I'll take you very quickly to Azores, which is same latitude as Lisbon. It's roughly a third on the way from Portugal to the USA. Vines were planted there since 16th century. The wines are quite famous until the 19th century when the Region and phylloxera decimated the whole area. In 2003, there were only 120 hectares planted in this island. So you see that from 120,000 to 1,708 hectares from last declared figures from the IVV. I suspect if I have the figures from next figures will be even higher. The reason for that, UNESCO, the whole area was declared a UNESCO heritage site in 2004, and a lot of investments have gone. And if you haven't visited this is an absolutely amazing area to visit. It's really wild. It's really beautiful. You can see in the pictures here, the vineyards they're all planted as very tiny plots, extremely labor intensive. They're all small plots. They are built. There's some stone walls. Oh, it's island, so it's a volcanic soil. So all this little walls are built by volcanic rock, and the reason for that is to protect them from this. From the wind, from the salty spray from the sea, and also to a degree helps to warm the vineyard and to achieve ripeness. But they are very tiny plots. You can imagine how labor intensive they are to build, and also how labor intensive it is to farm on those vineyards. So you have to admire people who work in the Douro, but you also admire people who work in this wonderful vineyards. What's planted here is Arinto dos Açores, which is not the same as Arinto in the continent, and Verdelho, and Terrantes. But there's also other varieties like Aragonese, Reds, Castelão, and another variety called Chaborinho. The climate here is maritime, as you can imagine, in the middle of the ocean, very humid, very unpredictable. It doesn't get very hot, but it can go up to 30, 32 sort of in the summer, and doesn't get very cold in the winter, sort of single figures, 7 or 8, I would suspect. And it is labor intensive, so the cost of grapes are quite high. Last time it was about 3 euros 1 kilo, so the wines are not inexpensive in this area, as you can imagine, but they are worth it. And if you want to have a look at those wines, I tasted one recently, and it was amazing. It was we're talking about mostly white wines here. They are red, but mostly white, and they are light in alcohol. They are fresh. They are crisp. They have a saline influence. They are absolutely wonderful wines. Reminds me a little bit of really linear Chablis in style, slightly more salty, but that's very, very almost austere quality to it. Okay, and that's it. We are in Madeira, about 1,000 kilometers from the mainland. Very tiny properties also. You can see in this picture. Total vineyard area is about 1,052 hectares. The varieties, as you expect, is the same. They make Madeira, the fortified wine, Verdelho, Malvasia, Cercial, and Boal. Also Terrantes and Tinta Negra Mole. The plantings are here quite hard to farm because they're mostly in the pergolas, very small plots. Climate is semi-tropical, it's humid. A lot of people from Europe go and retire there because the summers are not very hot and the winters are not very cold. So you can imagine what that does to the vines. Soils are very volcanic. Well, they are not very. They are volcanic soils, and I don't see many still wines. We're talking about still wines here. I don't see many still wines from Madeira outside, but I've been lucky to spend a holiday there and going to local shops and buying the wines. And the wines are very, very light in color, light in body, high in acid, and they're good wines to go with food and really refreshing wines. And that's it for Madeira. So in general terms, in the wine business, quickly, just to give you people who are studying for diploma some stats and new stats. Portugal produces here 6.5 million hectoliters. 45% of the wine is exported in terms of value, brings into the country 820 million euros, accounting for 1.4 of total of Portuguese exports. Portugal is the 11th largest wine producer in the world and the 9th largest exporter, and it retains 2.6% of the global share. This is some information I got from the Institute of Vines and Wine. Last figures, let's set of figures, which tells you who are the people who are drinking the most in terms of Portuguese wines, which is surprisingly is France, followed by Germany, Angola, UK, US, Brazil, Belgium, Spain, Canada, and Netherlands. So all of you guys who are watching from around the globe, you're doing an amazing job drinking Portuguese wines. I haven't seen the most recent figures, but the last set of figures, the export figures, I mean, we have the middle of COVID now, but the last set of figures of Portuguese export was up by 7.5%, which is great. I think people are looking for authentic wines. People are looking for something different and more diversity, and it shows on the figures of Portugal. Just the last point I want to make is the diversity of Portugal. If you look at it is a small country, 92, as I said, 92,000 kilometers square, as I mentioned at the beginning. And if you look at the 250,000 grape varieties planted, there's a ratio of 2.7 grape varieties for every 1,000 kilometers square. So Portugal, if you do it this way, is the most diverse country in the world. People think Italy, yeah, Italy obviously, but is Italy slightly larger? Italy, if you look at the stats from the Ministry of Agriculture of Italy, they declare 350,000 hectares, 350 grape varieties which are grown in Italy, which are autochthonous to Italy. I suspect there are more, but here we are. Portugal is diverse, and I have been. I drink a lot of Portuguese wines. I like champagne. I like Burgundy, but I taste a lot of Portuguese wines, and I enjoy Portuguese wines. Why? Because the quality is great. The climate is good, so the wines are quite consistent. They have lovely fruit flavors, but also they have great structure, good acidity. So they're great wines to go with food. If you want to talk to your friends about something different than Chardonnay and Cabernet and so on, I think Portugal is always something different to offer, some unique, as I said, unique selling points. They are less widely available, so if you want to show, as I said, something different, they do have a sense of place. If you put your nose on this Altano here, it takes me straight back to the Douro. So the wines really have a sense of place, and they are not. I've been a buyer for many, many years of my life, and I do value wines that give good value for money. And Portugal's, I mean, every time. I mean, this Planalto I bought from £6.99 in UK. That is one of the best value for money wines in the high street, I think. And Altano is not far behind. But you go up, I'm not talking about entry level, you go up into the top end, you have wines that are comparable to some top Bordeaux and a fraction of the price. And you see people like people who have the know-how from Lynch-Barge working in Portugal, people who have the know-how of Pichon Longueville, Axta Millésime working in Portugal, Chapoutier. There's a lot of know-how that's from France and from other countries. So they are comparable to some great classic wines and not very expensive. So if you have any questions, I think Julia can relate them to me now, but you have my website and my Instagram. You can send me a message if you wish. I'll do my best. I have some new stats. Somebody mentioned Alvarinho, so I can give you some exact plantations of Alvarinho. Just message me. You should follow those handles for Wines of Portugal, for Brazil or USA, depending where you are, UK, Canada, or Japan. But also, more importantly, also if you want to find out what's happening in WSET, there you are. Follow those Instagram and Twitter, and also there is also the website for you to enroll for the next webinar. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you learned one thing or two. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you so much for that. That was fascinating. I mean, already there's loads of people commenting on the chat and their appreciation and their thanks to you, which I can only add to. If anyone does have any questions now, I think I saw just one just then about aging potential for Portuguese wines, if that's something you might be interested to comment on.
Broadly, it's difficult because we need to talk about what we're talking about. We're talking about a light wine from Lisbon. I say no, even if a red wine, say drink it now. But I have bottles of wine in my cellar from Bairrada. They are from the 70s. And I have been lucky to taste wines from the 50s, which are white and red, which are amazing. And I'm going to talk about even Alvarinho for a second, because Alvarinho is a white, and people think wine should be drunk within a year or two. And I was giving a lecture in Rio a couple of years ago. And in Brazil, people often, I like China, people enjoy more red wines. So white wine is almost like an afterthought. And this lecture was about ageability, and I have some wines from the Douro, mostly, from the current vintage, and some older wines, 10, 15 years old. And the wines, they age beautifully, 10 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old, they are phenomenal. But the one wine that surprised mostly, it was an Alvarinho, which was about 15 years old. And in age, it almost became like a Burgundian. It lost its citrus fruits and exuberance, but it got a wonderful texture. I think Gruner Veltliner, Burgundy, Alvarinho. So you just have to pay attention because the white wines can age very well. I think wines from Baga, which have very high acid and firm structure, those wines can age for a long time, ongoing decades. So it very much depends which area, how the wines were made, and so on. But if you have a good wine from Douro, a good wine from Down, a good wine from Bairrada, red wine, you can at least 20, 25 years.
I think that's a project for all of us to work on there. Just a response to a question about, can we have a real tasting when we're allowed? But also we did do one. When was it? End of last year, we had you come in and do an excellent tasting for us. So yeah, they do happen. There's, yeah, you're right, there's maybe not as many of them as Bordeaux, but definitely one to keep an eye out for. What else we got here? Is there a trend for fortified wine producers moving into still wines?
It's a good question. Well, you know, the fortified wine, it's all down to the beneficio. It depends how much, you know, how your wines are graded from the classification, which was in the 1940s, called the Fonseca classification. So on average, if you have 100 vines, you can do roughly a pipe or a pipa, as I say in Portugal, 550 liters. It changes, it depends. So whatever you're allowed to, you go into port. The rest you can make into still wines. But more and more people are vinifying red still wines. And also, yes, there will be a trend, to answer your question. I think there will be a trend towards more towards red wine and more elegant red wines. But also one trend that I foresee for Douro, which is quite surprising, is white wines. And they are really amazing. They are phenomenal.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is a region we do very much associate with big red wines. So
yeah, I think I'll just answer now. I thought there are also, if you look at at the site of the IVDP, you see that in terms of volume, still red wines overtakes the fortified. So the Douro now does make more still wines in terms of volume than fortified wines already.
Blimey. Does that mean we all need to drink more fortifieds as well?
Beg your pardon?
Does that mean we all need to drink more fortifieds as well?
Well, I think fortified, what's going to happen? Yeah, I think we should, because what's happening, they have a lot of great vintages. And also because of climate change and so on, I suspect what's going to happen in the future, we're going to see more vintage declarations. It used to be 3 or 4 every decade. We might see more than that, but I think the volume of the production will be smaller. So it won't necessarily be more Porto, more fortified wine, but it will be more vintages, because some of the vintages are being phenomenal. And it's hard when you make such a great wine, and the next harvest is also as good. So what are you going to do? Are you going to declare it or not? So people declaring, I think they're declaring less volume.
Makes sense. All right, it's probably about time to wrap it up here. Oh, final question I've just seen come from about what would be your your desert island table wine, Portuguese table wine. If you had to pick one, what would you go for?
No, I didn't anticipate that question. Oh my gosh. Tough one. I said to you earlier, I have a soft spot from down, because of it's an area which it's all surrounded by mountains, by high altitude. In Touriga Nacional from here, it has that wild dark fruits, but also has some lots of violets and beautifully structured. I love when they have sort of almost like a herbal, the whole area is surrounded by pine trees and eucalyptus and all that. Sometimes you see that in wine. It really takes you, give you that sense of place. And I like that and the freshness that those wines give. But then you go to Douro and you get some of the old 80-year-old vineyards from Douro. It's hard to pick a desert island, but I'm going to go with a great wine from down. Just to be different, because Douro is quite predictable.
Well, we won't hold you to it. You can change your mind later if you like. It's all right. Cool. Well, I think that is a nice place to finish up on then. So once again, thank you so much for all that information. It's been fascinating. And thank you to everyone who's managed to join us this evening. I'll just end the